we've been talking about the irregularities in the way that Formula One is governed for a long time. Abu Dhabi is just one example of that, but it's much, much bigger than that. Mm-hmm. And I think fundamentally there's a disconnect between the wording of the regulations that's being used to actually govern the sport and the way the sport's actually being governed. There's too many unspoken agreements and understandings in the way that the sport's supposed to behave in terms of what is the intent of the regulations and what is the letter of it.
The letter,
yeah,
right.
And this is kind of less of an issue with the technical regulations because teams are assumed they're going to pursue every possible thing regardless of what your intent was. Whatever the rules specifically say, that's what they're going to operate to. But that's on the sporting side of it. It's been a little bit more ambiguous. Regarding Alonso's penalty, he was too far to his left when he was lining up on his grid box, right. And that's the improper start. And the current procedure is to give someone a 5-second time penalty for that. Mm-hmm. Ocon was given the same penalty.
Yeah, he was too
for the
far
same
to the right.
infraction. Now, to be clear, there were other cars on the grid that were not as far as Alonso, but like farther than Ocon, right. And they weren't penalized. So even that is already a problem. But sidestepping that, if you look at what happened when Alonso came in, the rule is you're not allowed to work on the car under the time frame in which you're serving your penalty. And by normal understanding of the way that that's working is that means you can't touch the car.
You can't touch the car
in that window. However, as Fernando came in and the rear jack man came in, he did set the jack up, engage it, with the car, right when Alonso came in during the time window. He didn't lift the car up because you're not allowed to do whatever, but he touched the car with the jack, and then eventually it came to light that that happened. The FIA missed it originally. Okay. That's part of the reason why it took so long for that penalty to show up, is because they reviewed it at the time and thought it was fine,
right.
And then they were tipped off, likely by Mercedes, that there was engagement there, and then they gave a penalty based on this no touching rule. The problem is Aston Martin, and again, you got to give Aston Martin credit for being vicious on the track and off the track.
I do.
They had, within half an hour, they had a list of seven different instances
right.
of when a jack was touching the car and it was unpunished. The difference here is that it was always the front jack that was touching the car.
I'm glad you said that.
And the thing is, the argument has always been, oh, well, the front jack is used to guide the car, and et cetera, et cetera. It's
right.
like, even allowing that's a problem,
right?
From a governance point of view, we can already see that if the regulation says no touching, no touching, well, that's just like a meme. No touching, no touching of the car,
right?
And then you allow touching. But it's just commonly understood that, well, we'll just allow this type of touching, but you don't put it in the regulations. That gives a team with the temerity and the wherewithal the ability to push back on that and explore that and say, well, you know what? You didn't penalize, 7 other teams for doing the exact same thing we're doing. How can you penalize us for this in this race? And
right.
the argument is completely valid in that there is no ground to stand on if you are going to arbitrarily punish this one team versus another one. And maybe even, who knows, Esteban Ocon, if Alpine had like better lawyers or better people ready to go, they could have maybe fought their penalty too. Who knows?
Right.
But Aston Martin did fight it. So it's just the latest instance in a growing and concerning trend that the way that the FIA governs the sport is consistent with the smaller sport, old F1, the way things used to be. Mm-hmm. The problem is Formula One has grown exponentially in the last few years, but it's still being governed like a private club.
Right.
And the thing is, there's just too much at stake now. There's too much money involved. There's too many eyes on the sport now to continue running it like that. I think that was just the most recent example of it.
Right. Now, I feel like the front jack situation is a bit of an area where I can understand, because the front jack sits there the car literally pulls into the front jack. It's not really like the front jack man is coming in, the car stops, and he makes contact. It's literally there for a guide point. The car makes its contact on approach to the front jack. I think the secondary initiation of the rear jack come in, it is where you should constitute where that can happen. If they're going to rewrite the regs, they need to be very clear about that process and how it will lay out. That is what I firmly believe. And another thing I believe is this. If they showed you 7 other instances, although the front jack, then you really saying to yourself, we got it wrong all this time. But I do think the front jack allowed, rear jack not. I think more so they overturned that due to the money issue, the fact that Alonso's talking about sponsorship and it's his 100th podium and maybe they don't want it to look a certain way. Same thing we kind of had it up down. Like, it's like we want a climatic end. We want a climatic end, and to take this from Alonso's like 100th podium, it just sells better. So I think there are a lot of things mixed in there, but I do agree with you on the regulations and how they're written out. And they need to focus on like really pinpoint. If they didn't learn after 2021, what's going to make them learn? And I think you made a very good point with like, hey, you can't keep running the sport this way, but they seem like they want to continue to try to do that.